In the summer of 1590, English supply ships finally reached the struggling colony on Roanoke Island after 3 years of delay. The relief expedition expected to find settlers desperate for provisions, eager for news from home. Instead, they found nothing. No people. No bodies. No signs of violence. Just empty buildings, overgrown gardens, and a single word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan. Over 117 people had simply vanished, men, women, and children, including Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. It would become the oldest unsolved mystery in American history, a puzzle that has fascinated investigators for centuries. This is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, what we know, what we can reasonably infer, and what recent discoveries are revealing about the fate of those missing settlers. To understand what happened at Roanoke, we need to understand why the English were there in the first place. In the 1580s, England was locked in a struggle with Spain for dominance of the Atlantic world. Spain had grown wealthy from its American colonies, England wanted its share. Sir Walter Raleigh, one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite courtiers, received a charter to establish an English colony in the New World. He named the territory Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen and organized a series of expeditions to claim it. The first Roanoke expedition in 1584 was purely exploratory. English ships surveyed the coast and made contact with local Native American tribes, the Secatan and the Croatoan. Relations were friendly at first, with the English trading European goods for food and information. A second expedition in 1585 established a small military outpost on Roanoke Island with about 100 men, led by Ralph Lane. But this venture quickly went wrong. Relations with the indigenous peoples deteriorated after the English made unreasonable demands for food and land. Lane launched a preemptive attack on the Secatan town of Dacemunkapuke, killing their chief. When Sir Francis Drake's fleet arrived in 1586, the discouraged colonists abandoned the settlement and sailed home with him. The first attempt at Roanoke had failed. But Raleigh wasn't finished. In 1587, he organized a new expedition, this time a genuine colonization effort with families, not just soldiers. 117 settlers departed England in May 1587, led by John White, an artist who had visited Roanoke before and documented the land and its people in detailed watercolors. The plan was for the colonists to settle on Chesapeake Bay, further north than Roanoke, in territory not yet poisoned by Lane's violent expedition. But when the ships reached the Carolina coast, the pilot Simon Fernandez refused to take them any further. He had privateering, essentially legalized piracy against Spanish ships, on his mind and wanted to get to business. So the colonists were dumped on Roanoke Island, the very place where Ralph Lane had made enemies of the local tribes. They were starting over in the worst possible location. The early weeks were tense. George Howe, one of the colonists, was killed by Native Americans while fishing alone, likely revenge for Lane's earlier violence. The settlers were isolated, vulnerable, and running short of supplies. The Croatoan people, who lived on a nearby island now called Hatteras, remained friendly. Their chief, Manteo, had traveled to England twice and served as a mediator between the colonists and other tribes. He was baptized as a Christian and named Lord of Roanoke, the first Native American to receive an English title. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. It was a moment of hope amid the uncertainty. But the colony needed help. They were short of food and supplies, and winter was approaching. Governor John White agreed to return to England and organize a relief expedition. He left behind his daughter Eleanor, his granddaughter Virginia, and over 100 other colonists. White expected to return within months. Instead, 3 years would pass before he saw Roanoke again, and he would never see his family. The timing was catastrophic. In 1588, the Spanish Armada sailed against England. Every available ship was commandeered for defense. When the crisis passed, privateering and war-related activities continued to tie up shipping. White made several attempts to reach Virginia but was repeatedly thwarted by circumstances. Finally, in August 1590, White reached Roanoke as part of a privateering expedition that agreed to stop at the colony. What he found haunted him for the rest of his life. The settlement was deserted. The buildings had been dismantled. The colonists' possessions, chests that had been buried for safekeeping, had been dug up and scattered. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies, no graves. Carved into a post at the entrance to the palisade was a single word, Croatoan. On a nearby tree, the letters CRO had been carved but not completed. Before White had left 3 years earlier, he and the colonists had agreed on a signal. If they had to relocate, they would carve their destination. If they left under duress, they would add a Maltese cross to the carving. There was no cross. To White, this suggested the colonists had left voluntarily and gone to Croatoan Island, modern Hatteras, home of their friendly indigenous allies. White was desperate to sail to Croatoan and search for survivors. But storms were brewing, anchors had been lost, and the ship's captain refused to risk his vessel. The expedition sailed away, and John White never returned to the New World. He spent his remaining years haunted by uncertainty, dying around 1593 without ever learning what happened to his daughter and granddaughter. The colonists were simply gone. So what actually happened to them? Let's examine the leading theories, weighing the evidence for each. The most straightforward explanation, and the one suggested by the Croatoan carving, is that the colonists relocated to live with the Croatoan people on Hatteras Island. They were running low on supplies, surrounded by hostile tribes, and their Native American allies offered safety. This theory gained significant support in the early 2000s when archaeologists found evidence of European presence at a Croatoan site on Hatteras Island. Artifacts included a signet ring, gun parts, and pieces of European-made copper, materials the colonists might have brought with them. Later English explorers and colonists at Jamestown, established in 1607, heard persistent reports from Native Americans about European-looking people living in the interior. John Smith wrote of rumors that some Roanoke colonists had survived among indigenous tribes. The Jamestown colonists never found definitive proof, but the rumors suggest that at least some Roanoke settlers may have survived for decades by integrating into Native American communities. A second theory proposes that the colonists split into multiple groups. Some might have gone to Croatoan, while others attempted to reach Chesapeake Bay, their original intended destination, or moved inland along rivers. Recent research by the First Colony Foundation has identified a site called Site X along the Chowan River, inland from the coast, where archaeological evidence suggests English presence from the late 16th century. Pottery shards and other materials match the Roanoke time period. This site was identified by re-examining one of John White's original maps, which showed corrections and patches that, when illuminated from behind, revealed a hidden symbol marking an inland location. The colonists may have had this as a planned fallback position. A darker theory suggests the colonists were killed either by hostile Native Americans seeking revenge for Lane's earlier attacks, or by the Spanish, who had been actively trying to prevent English colonization. Spanish records from the period mention efforts to locate and destroy the English settlement. However, the evidence against violent annihilation is significant. John White found no bodies, no mass graves, no signs of battle. The settlement had been systematically dismantled, not destroyed. Personal possessions had been carefully buried, not abandoned in panic. The Croatoan carving itself argues against sudden violence. The colonists had time to leave a message. If they were fleeing an attack, would they stop to carve words into posts and trees? More likely, the colonists made a planned relocation when it became clear that relief wasn't coming. After waiting 3 years, they had to do something. They couldn't stay on Roanoke forever, slowly starving as their supplies ran out and their English tools wore out. The most compelling modern theory combines these elements. The colonists probably dispersed to multiple locations. Some went to Croatoan, where they had friends. Others may have moved inland toward Site X or attempted to reach Chesapeake Bay. Over time, survivors would have been absorbed into Native American communities through marriage and adoption. This assimilation theory is supported by intriguing genetic and physical evidence from centuries later. When European explorers and settlers pushed into the Carolina interior in the 17th and 18th centuries, they encountered Native American communities whose members sometimes had European features, lighter skin, gray eyes, English surnames. The Lumbee people of North Carolina have long claimed descent from the Roanoke colonists. While this connection remains unproven by DNA testing, oral traditions and some historical evidence support the possibility that lost colony survivors merged with indigenous populations. The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened to every colonist. But we can reasonably conclude several things based on the evidence. First, the colonists almost certainly survived in some form for at least several years after whites' departure. The planned nature of their relocation, the lack of violence, and the Native American reports heard at Jamestown all point to organized survival rather than sudden death. Second, they likely dispersed rather than staying together as a single group. The Croatoan carving and the Site X evidence suggest multiple destinations. This makes sense as a survival strategy. Spreading out reduces the risk that a single disaster could kill everyone. Third, their descendants probably merged into Native American communities and eventually into the broader colonial population as English settlement expanded. The Roanoke colonists didn't vanish, they were absorbed. What strikes me about this mystery is how close we came to solving it, and how circumstances conspired to create the puzzle. If John White had returned in 1588 as planned, he would have found the colonists, perhaps struggling, perhaps already relocated, but findable. If the ships in 1590 had sailed to Croatoan despite the weather, White might have been reunited with his family. The mystery exists because of bad timing, bad weather, and the Spanish Armada. The lost colony wasn't lost because people disappeared into thin air. They were lost because the connection between them and England was severed at a crucial moment. When that connection was finally restored, it was too late, the trail had gone cold, and the colonists had vanished into the American wilderness. But they didn't vanish completely. They survived. They adapted. They merged with the people who had lived on this land for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. Their descendants are probably among us still. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, probably grew up speaking an Algonquian language, wearing Native American clothing, and living a life utterly different from anything her parents imagined. It's not the ending the colonists planned, but it's probably what happened. What do you think happened to the lost colony? Do you believe they survived among Native American communities, or do you favor another theory? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to explore more of history's unsolved mysteries, subscribe and hit the notification bell. The past still has stories waiting to be uncovered.